Hey everyone, when I left university I got a job as an investment actuary, and that put me on the path to earn six figures by my early 30s. Investment actuaries aren't very common, so I thought in this video I'd run through what an investment actuary is and what makes them unique. By the way, if you're new here, my name's Josh. I'm an investment actuary turned YouTuber. I currently work as an investment researcher, which means I just love to better understand the world we live in and find ways to progress. So what is an investment actuary? An investment actuary is essentially an actuary that works in the investment industry. To become an actuary, you have to qualify as an actuary, you have to pass, well, in my day it was 15 exams and do some work-based skills, and you would be signed off as an actuary. And to work in the investment industry, you have to work essentially for an asset manager, a consultant, or a pension scheme, or you might call it an asset owner. Investment actuaries are probably one of the least common actuaries, and most actuaries tend to work in pensions, so working for pension schemes, or helping pension schemes understand their liabilities. Their liabilities is essentially something they have to pay out in the future. Or actuaries tend to work for insurance companies, and actuaries help them calculate their liabilities, which is essentially any future claims on that insurance policy. As I mentioned, the actuarial syllabus has about 15 exams, and after you've passed the first, well, in my day it was 10, you are then able to specialise. I specialised in finance and investment, but you can also specialise in the other more common areas, which is pensions and insurance. So what makes investment actuaries unique in the investment industry? One is the focus on liabilities. So a lot of investors focus on generating a certain amount of return for a given unit of risk, but actuaries quite often focus on the liability side. So they're optimising their investment portfolio around having to pay out certain liabilities or cash flows in the future. So for a pension scheme, the liabilities are pension payments in the future. So when your pension member retires, they have to pay out a certain amount to that pensioner in the future, and that might be in 20 years time, for example. For an insurance company, when they write the policy, they get the premiums in, but at some point there might be a claim on that policy and the insurance company will have to pay out that claim. So an investment actuary's role is to make sure that there's enough money at that point in the future to pay out those claims. So perhaps to put this more succinctly, while a lot of investors just focus on the asset side, investment actuaries have to focus on the asset and liability side. Perhaps to bring liabilities to life in a bit more detail, you might have personal liabilities, so that might be rent payments, food. So your cash flows have to cover those outgoings, i.e. those liabilities. So an investment actuary might work with an individual and say, okay, you've got this amount of savings, that's your pension pot, you've got these contributions, i.e. your salary, and you have these liabilities, i.e. you have to pay this out in the future. What investment strategy should we set for that savings pot to make sure that we've got enough to cover the liabilities that you've mentioned in the future? Interestingly, I work as a sustainable investment researcher, so my role is optimizing around any future potential risk as it relates to sustainability. So those contributions, those payments, and the overall investment pot, how is that affected by sustainability factors? Obviously, we want that pot to be sustainable, we want it to still be there in the future, so how do we best deal with that? The second way investment actuaries are unique is they focus on the long term, so a large chunk of the investment industry focuses on, I would say, like 1 year, 2 year, 3 year returns, because that's the kind of time frame that most of the corporate world works on. That's the time frame that people kind of get feedback on their actions for. But investment actuaries tend to work on much longer time horizons. So for example, you might be working on a life insurance policy that might not get claimed upon in 10 or 20 years. You might be working on a pension scheme that has to pay out its pensions in 30 years, 40 years. So these are massive time horizons, and so you have to take into account the different sort of risk and return assumptions, and you have to sit around and think about what the future might look like in 10, 20 years. I've really embraced this as an actuary and have loved reading and researching about the future. That's what got me into sustainability. It's probably the most tangible kind of future that we can see over the next 20 to 30 years. That's why we've all set net zero goals, halving emissions by 2030 and full net zero by 2050. But there are obviously going to be loads of other themes that are playing out over that time period. You think about the future of technology, AI, healthcare. All of these factors will need to be taken into account when you're setting investment strategies. Element number 3 that makes investment actuaries unique is their intense focus on quant and modelling. So actuaries tend to be highly mathematical. As I mentioned, I did a maths degree and then I did actuarial course, which took me 4 years to pass. You basically just have to get through all the exams, so it can take anywhere from, I know people that have done it really quickly, people that have never qualified. So I did it in 4 years, and that's obviously an intensely mathematical course as well. There are a number of highly mathematical foundational exams within the actuarial syllabus. So to get through those first I would say 9 to 10 exams requires quite a lot of mathematical background. You don't have to be a mathematician to become an actuary, but it definitely helps. Particularly on the investment side, as I mentioned in one of my other videos, the derivative specialist exam, which is the one I did, focused on finance and investment using derivatives, actually uses a lot of high-level advanced mathematics to derive and use the Black-Scholes formula that I mentioned in my previous video. So if you're going to become an investment actuary, you'll probably need to recognize that a large part of your time will be spent on spreadsheets, building models, and moving numbers around. I mean, recently I've just come off the back of a big project where we measured the climate risk using a number of different metrics for the first time of all of our portfolios, and it was a lot of spreadsheet work. I'm talking spreadsheets all day, all evening. Yeah. So you gotta learn to, well, if you enjoy that stuff, then it's kind of the perfect role. I would say there is a mix, right? So you have to crunch all the numbers, but then you have to actually use the numbers, and that's when things get interesting. So point number 4 that makes investment actuaries unique is they tend to be quite prudent and risk averse. I guess a lot of people's image of the investment industry is like investment bankers, traders, people taking huge amounts of risks and eventually blowing up the economy. Well, I'd say investment actuaries are slightly different to that because it's a professional body and actuaries have to sign off the solvency of insurance companies or pension schemes. Actuaries tend to be quite risk averse and quite prudent. So they talk about this prudence that's incorporated into the sign off of, the solvency of different pension schemes or insurance companies. And that's to make sure that there is some sort of buffer in your assumptions. And that's just to make the investment strategy extra safe and reduce the risk that something bad will happen to that company or pension scheme. I'd say, however, this is a bit of a generalization. So my role initially was in investment research, and I was tasked with finding some quite high risk investments within the hedge fund space, within emerging market debt. So I would say that I was encouraged to take perhaps a bit more risk to ensure that our overall portfolio had the return profile we needed. And that meant sometimes dealing with high levels of risk with the investments that I recommended. And that was just something I personally had to deal with. So point number 5 that makes investment actuaries unique is they tend to be highly trained in theory. So as I mentioned, there's 15 exams that you have to take to become an actuary. You cover all sorts from statistics, economics, business, pure maths, options, derivatives. It's all in there. So you come out of the course as a qualified actuary and as someone highly, highly valuable in terms of investment theory and business knowledge. There are other professional qualifications out there that you can do if you work in the investment industry. I think there's the KIA, alternative investments qualification. There's the CFA, obviously that's the big one, which is a bit more narrow, but a bit more focused on financial analysis. I think the actuarial course is probably the hardest one out there. It's definitely the longest, the most comprehensive. Each set of course notes is like that thick for the 15 exams. One's even bigger. It was called CA1 in my time. Yeah, there's a huge amount of theory that you have to learn and memorize and be able to apply to qualify as an actuary, and that's quite rare in the investment industry, I would say. I like that. I think to give me the confidence in making the decisions I had to make. I like knowing all the theory and all the background and things to hang my hat on, I'd say. And the other benefit of knowing all the theory, as I talked about in one of my other videos, is that you can see the problems with it and work to come up with solutions and alternative perspectives that the theory doesn't cover, because as we know, theories are never perfect and there are always going to be problems, as it's a estimation of reality, not always a perfect depiction of reality. The map is not the territory is one of my favorite quotes relating to that. So I love the fact the actuarial profession gave me a really in-depth knowledge of the theory and the investment industry, and I thoroughly enjoyed learning it. But then I realized that it's not the be all and end all within the investment industry. So you can get by quite far using your intuition, experience, and working with senior leaders within the investment industry itself. I think you tend to find the CFA is relatively new, so a lot of my seniors didn't have qualifications, and so they were very much not a prerequisite for doing well at work. That being said, I thoroughly enjoyed doing it. I like learning all the theory and knowledge. It was almost a hobby, and I love being able to apply what I learned in the real world. So there we have it. That was my 5 reasons why investment actuaries are unique. I also went through what an investment actuary is. I really enjoyed making this video. I hope you enjoyed it too, and if you want to hear more from me, don't forget to check out this one here.